There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the simple weight of a blanket. You don't recognize them as pivotal until long after they've passed, when you look back and see them for what they were, the hinges upon which your entire world swung. For me, that moment smelled like clean laundry and the faint, lingering scent of the lavender soap I kept in the guest bathroom, the one he always used. It was the sound of his breathing, a deep and steady rhythm that had become the metronome of my life. He was asleep on my couch, a place he had occupied so often it felt more his than mine. The city outside was a distant, murmuring beast, but in here, in the small universe of my living room, the only thing that mattered was the rise and fall of his chest beneath the thin gray throw blanket. I was sitting in the worn armchair across from him, a book open in my lap, though I hadn't turned a page in over an hour. The lamplight cast a soft, amber glow, carving shadows into the hollows of his cheeks and catching the tips of his dark eyelashes. Liam slept like he did everything else, with a kind of unguarded, absolute commitment. His mouth was slightly parted, his typically restless energy finally stilled. One arm was thrown over his head, his hand resting in the dark waves of his hair, while the other was tucked beneath the cushion, as if holding onto some secret dream. In sleep, the carefully constructed walls he presented to the world, the easy confidence of the star athlete, the bright, disarming smile, crumbled away, leaving behind something softer, something achingly vulnerable. And I, the quiet observer, the chronicler of subtle shifts in light and mood, was the sole witness to it. It was a privilege that felt as heavy as it was precious. This had become our ritual, an unspoken arrangement that had taken root in the fractured soil of his life and blossomed in the quiet space of mine. It began with a phone call, then a text, and now, it was simply an assumption. His key would turn in the lock sometime after dinner, his gym bag would drop by the door with a familiar thud, and he would collapse onto my sofa as if it were the only safe harbor in a storm-tossed sea. And I, in my quiet, predictable way, would let him. I would make tea he rarely drank, offer food he often refused, and then settle into my chair, providing a silent, steady presence until he drifted off. It was a friendship, that's what we called it. That's what it had been for years. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred, washed away by a tide of unspoken need on his part, and a deep, secret, and suffocating love on mine. Watching him sleep on my couch, I felt like an astronomer gazing at a distant star, close enough to feel its warmth, but knowing I could never, ever touch it. The space between my chair and his temporary bed felt both infinitesimally small and impossibly vast. It was in that space, in that quiet, lamplit room, that my world was slowly, terrifyingly, beginning to change. We met in a place designed for such beginnings. A sprawling university campus that felt like a world unto itself. I was a ghost in the machine, a photography major who spent more time in the darkroom, watching images bloom into existence under the subtle glow of the safe light, than I did in the actual sun. My world was one of shadows and light, of capturing fleeting moments and pinning them to paper, studying the way a person's entire story could be told in the slight downturn of their lips or the way they held their shoulders. I was an observer by nature and by trade, more comfortable behind the lens than in front of it. My camera was both a shield and a bridge. It allowed me to get close to the world without ever truly having to be a part of it. I documented life from a safe, curated distance, my heart a tightly guarded archive of feelings I never dared to develop. Liam was the opposite of a shadow. He was pure, unadulterated sunlight. He was the captain of the swim team, a kinesiology major whose name was synonymous with victory and a kind of golden, effortless charm. He moved through the campus like a current, drawing people into his wake with an easy smile and a laugh that seemed to echo in the cavernous hallways of the athletic center. He was a creature of motion, of tangible, physical reality. While I was capturing stillness, he was a study in fluid dynamics, his body a perfectly calibrated instrument designed to cut through water with grace and power. I knew of him the way everyone did, a bright, distant figure you saw at pep rallies or whose picture was plastered on posters advertising the next big meet. He was a campus legend, a part of the landscape, and completely, utterly out of my orbit. Our worlds collided not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a camera shutter. I had been assigned a project for my portraiture class, the architecture of the human form. The professor wanted us to explore the lines, curves, and tensions of the body in motion. Naturally, my mind went to the athletes. I spent days lurking around the practice fields and gyms, my camera feeling more like a clumsy appendage than an extension of my eye. I was intimidated, an intruder in a world of disciplined, physical prowess. Then I found my way to the natatorium. The air was thick with the scent of chlorine, a smell I've associated with him ever since. The vast, echoing space was filled with the rhythmic sound of splashing water and the sharp blast of a coach's whistle. And there he was. He was in the water, a place where he seemed more at home than on land. I watched him for nearly an hour before I even lifted my camera. His form was poetry. The powerful pull of his arms, the sharp turn of his head for a breath, the explosive kick of his legs. It was a violent, beautiful dance. When he finally hauled himself out of the pool, water streaming from his hair and down the hard planes of his back, he looked less like a college student and more like something carved from stone by an ancient master. He saw me then, standing in the bleachers, my camera held loosely in my hands. I expected annoyance, a dismissive wave, the kind of impatience a campus celebrity might show a star-struck underclassman. Instead, he smiled. It wasn't his public, poster-ready smile. It was smaller, a little tired, but genuine. He wiped his face with a towel and walked over, his bare feet slapping against the wet tiles. "You a photographer?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that was surprisingly gentle in the echoing space. I just nodded, my own voice suddenly a foreign concept. He gestured to my camera. "For the school paper?" I managed to shake my head. "Class project," I croaked out, feeling my cheeks flush with heat. I explained the assignment in a halting, awkward mess of words, expecting him to lose interest at any moment. But he listened, his head tilted, his gaze direct and curious. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "Cool," he said. "You need a model?" It was that simple, that unexpected. That was Liam. He saw someone on the periphery and, without a second thought, invited them in. That first photo shoot was the foundation of our friendship. I was a nervous wreck, my hands fumbling with lenses and light meters. He was patient, endlessly so. He followed my clumsy directions, holding poses, diving into the water again and again, never once complaining about the cold or the repetition. In between shots, he talked. He asked me about photography, about what I saw through the lens, about what made a picture good. He wasn't just making small talk. He was genuinely interested. He had this incredible capacity for focus, the same intensity he brought to his swimming, he now directed at me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Not just observed, but truly seen. He saw past the quiet, awkward exterior to the person who was passionate about capturing the world. The photos I took that day were the best I had ever produced. They were more than just a class assignment. They were a record of a beginning. In the darkroom, as his image emerged on the photographic paper, I felt a strange and unfamiliar flutter in my chest. I saw the strength in his shoulders, but also the exhaustion in his eyes. I saw the confidence in his posture, but also a hint of something searching in his expression. I had captured not just the athlete, but the man. And in the process of trying to understand his architecture, I had inadvertently started mapping the geography of my own heart. Our friendship grew from there, an unlikely but sturdy structure. We fell into an easy rhythm. We'd grab lunch at the student union, him recounting the grueling details of his morning practice, me talking about a new developing technique I was trying. We studied together in the library, his long legs stretched out under the table, often nudging mine. He would complain about biomechanics, and I would help him edit his essays, marveling at how someone so physically eloquent could be so clumsy with words. He, in turn, would drag me out of my darkroom solitude, insisting I needed sunlight and human interaction. He'd take me to parties where I would stand awkwardly in a corner, and he would always, without fail, circle back to me, a drink in hand, and stand with me, creating a small, safe bubble in the overwhelming noise. He was dating Sarah then, a bright, bubbly girl from the soccer team. She was nice, and they looked perfect together, the kind of couple you'd see in a university brochure. I liked her genuinely, but I was also acutely, painfully aware of the casual intimacy they shared. The way he would sling an arm around her shoulders, the way she would steal a fry from his plate, the easy, possessive way they touched. I would watch them from my carefully maintained distance, my camera a convenient excuse to be looking, to be studying them. I told myself I was documenting a dynamic, practicing my craft. But I was lying. I was cataloging every gesture, every shared glance, every soft touch, and filing it away in a secret, painful archive labeled "Things I Will Never Have." My feelings for him were a slow-developing photograph, an image that emerged so gradually I didn't recognize it for what it was until it was already fully formed, sharp, and undeniable. It wasn't a sudden crush. It was a deep, quiet settling. It was in the way my stomach would clench when he'd greet me with a one-armed hug, his body warm and solid against mine for a fleeting second. It was in the way I learned to read his moods, to know when his easy smile was a mask for exhaustion or stress. It was in the way I found myself saving the last of the coffee for him, or buying the brand of granola bars he liked, small, insignificant acts of devotion that went completely unnoticed. My love for him was a silent, one-sided conversation, a language I spoke only to myself in the privacy of my own mind. I built a fortress around it, protecting our friendship from the one thing I was sure would destroy it, the truth. The friendship was too precious, too vital. He was the anchor in my drifting, solitary world. To risk that for a feeling he could never return felt like a form of self-destruction I wasn't brave enough to contemplate. So I became a master of sublimation, channeling all that unspoken affection into being the best friend I could be, the listener, the steady presence, the safe harbor. I was the one place he could come and just be, without the pressure of being the star, the captain, the legend. And for a long time, that was enough. It had to be. The change came, as it so often does, in the form of an ending. His ending with Sarah. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive breakup full of shouting matches and thrown objects. It was something far more insidious, a slow erosion. They had been together for 3 years, their futures seemingly intertwined. They talked about moving in together after graduation, about jobs in the same city, about a life that was already mapped out. But the map was a fiction. He was nearing the end of his collegiate swimming career, facing the daunting reality of a life without the rigid structure of practice and competition that had defined him since he was a boy. The pressure of Olympic trials loomed, a monumental, terrifying peak he had to summit. Sarah, meanwhile, was accepting a job offer in a different state, her own future pulling her in a different direction. The divergence was quiet but absolute. Their shared path had split, and they found themselves standing on opposite sides of a growing chasm. He didn't tell me about it right away. Liam was never one to broadcast his pain. He processed things internally or through punishing physical exertion. I noticed the change in subtle ways. The light in his eyes seemed to dim. The easy, booming laugh became a rare commodity. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He started spending more time at my apartment, a small, cluttered space above a bookstore that had always been his refuge from the jock-filled dorm he shared with other swimmers. He'd show up with his textbooks, claiming he needed a quiet place to study, but he would spend hours just staring at the same page, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away. I didn't push. I just let him be, refilling his mug with coffee, putting on the instrumental music he liked, maintaining the quiet, stable atmosphere he seemed to need. I was the silent keeper of his unspoken grief. The night he finally told me, it was raining. A relentless, drumming downpour that blurred the city lights outside my window into a watercolor mess. He had arrived an hour earlier, soaked to the skin, and had been sitting on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the middle distance ever since. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the sound of the rain and the occasional sigh that escaped his lips. Finally, he spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "It's over," he said. Just that. 3 words that carried the weight of a collapsed world. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring straight ahead, as if the words were an object he had placed in the space between us. He told me the whole story then, not in a flood, but in disjointed fragments. Words and phrases surfaced like wreckage, different paths. "It's for the best. She's already packing." He spoke about it with a strange, detached calm, as if he were recounting a story about someone else. But his hands, clenched tightly in his lap, betrayed him. The knuckles were white. He wasn't just sad, he was adrift. Sarah hadn't just been his girlfriend, she had been his future. She was the answer to the terrifying question of what comes next. Now, that answer was gone, and he was left with nothing but the echoing silence of its absence. He was a swimmer without water, a creature of motion suddenly forced into a terrifying stillness. I don't know who I am without it," he finally whispered, and I knew he wasn't just talking about her. He was talking about the entire structure of his life. The swimming, the team, the future he had so carefully constructed. It was all dissolving. For the first time since I'd known him, Liam, the golden boy, the one who always had it all figured out, was completely and utterly lost. And in his disorientation, he did the only thing he could think to do. He reached for the one fixed point in his spinning universe. He reached for me. Can I just stay here tonight?" he asked, his voice cracking on the last word. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a raw, desperate plea that shattered my heart. It was a look I had never seen on him before. All the confidence, all the easy charm, was stripped away, leaving only a profound and terrifying vulnerability. Of course I said yes. What else could I say? I told him he could take my bed, that I would be fine on the couch. He just shook his head, a small, tired gesture. "No, the couch is fine," he murmured, already pulling the blanket tighter around himself, curling into a defensive ball. I don't want to be alone." That night was the beginning of the ritual. It was the first time he slept on my couch, not as a friend crashing after a late night, but as someone seeking sanctuary. I lay awake for hours in my own bed, the sound of the rain a mournful soundtrack to the storm raging inside him just one room away. I felt a terrible, selfish ache. A part of me, the dark, hopeful part one tried so hard to suppress, was glad he was here, that he had turned to me. The other part, the part that loved him as a friend, was consumed with a profound sadness for his pain. I was his harbor, but I knew, with a certainty that felt like a stone in my gut, that harbors are places ships leave when the storm passes. I was a temporary solution, a place of convenience. And I knew that eventually, the sun would come out, and he would sail away, leaving me alone on the shore. But for now, in the dark, with the rain lashing against the windows, he was here. And I held on to that fact like a drowning man holds onto a piece of driftwood. The storm did not pass quickly. In fact, it seemed to settle over him, a persistent, low-pressure system that leached the color from his world. The couch became his permanent fixture. He'd arrive in the evenings, exhausted from a day of pretending to be fine for his teammates and coaches, and the mask would drop the moment my door closed behind him. He barely spoke about Sarah anymore. Instead, a deep, pervasive loneliness seemed to emanate from him, a quiet desperation that filled the small spaces in my apartment. The ritual solidified. He would arrive, shed the skin of his public persona, and collapse. I would exist around him, a quiet, orbiting moon. I'd make dinner, and we'd eat in near silence, the clinking of our forks the only conversation. He'd try to study, but his focus was shot. More often than not, he'd just end up staring blankly at a textbook or scrolling aimlessly through his phone before giving up and succumbing to a heavy, troubled sleep on the couch. After about a week of this, he started complaining about his back. "This couch is a torture device, Ethan," he'd groan in the mornings, stretching with a wince. "I'm a finely tuned athletic machine. You're destroying me." It was the first flicker of his old humor I'd seen, and it made my heart ache with a bittersweet pang. I offered him my bed again, more insistently this time. "I'm serious, Liam. Take the bed. I can sleep anywhere," he resisted at first, with a mumbled protest about it being my space. But one night, after a particularly grueling practice had left him visibly in pain, he finally relented. "Okay," he said, his voice low with defeat. But just for tonight became the new normal. The transition was seamless and unspoken. He would finish his half-hearted attempt at studying, brush his teeth in my bathroom, and then disappear into my bedroom. I would wait a while, tidying the living room, washing the dishes, delaying the inevitable moment when I would have to navigate the new, terrifying geography of our evenings. At first, I tried to sleep on the couch, to maintain some semblance of boundaries. But he wouldn't have it. "Don't be an idiot," he called out from the bedroom on the third night. "The bed's huge. Just get in here." His tone was casual, matter-of-fact, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. For him, maybe it was. For a swimmer used to the casual physicality and shared spaces of a team, perhaps this was nothing. But for me, it was everything. Walking into my own bedroom felt like entering a foreign country. He was already there, lying on the side closest to the wall, a small lump under the covers. He had left the other side for me, the pillows neatly arranged. The only light was the faint glow from the street lamp outside, filtering through the blinds and striping the room in shades of gray and silver. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I moved with the exaggerated caution of a bomb disposal expert, trying not to make a sound, not to disturb the fragile peace. Slipping under the covers was an act of monumental significance. The air was thick with his presence, the clean scent of his soap and the warm, living smell of him. The mattress dipped with my weight, and I felt him shift slightly in response. I lay on my back, ramrod straight, my muscles coiled with tension, staring up at the ceiling and trying to remember how to breathe. This became the heart of the ritual. Every night, we would share a bed. And every night, I would lie awake for hours, hyper-aware of every single detail. The whisper of the sheets as he moved, the soft puff of his breath against the back of my neck when he turned to face me in his sleep, the sheer, overwhelming heat his body radiated, a constant, tempting warmth just inches from my own. I learned the rhythm of his sleep, the way he would twitch just before falling into a deep slumber, the soft, nonsensical mumbles that would escape his lips in the dead of night. I was a cartographer of his unconscious world, and it was both a beautiful and excruciating form of torture. The line between us and the bed was a border, a fiercely guarded frontier. I never crossed it. I would cling to the very edge of the mattress, giving him as much space as possible, terrified that any accidental touch would betray the secret I held coiled in my chest. But Liam, in his sleep, was a transgressor of boundaries. He had no respect for the carefully drawn map of my self-control. It started subtly, a hand thrown out in a dream, his fingers brushing against my arm. I would freeze, my entire nervous system lighting up like a switchboard, until he pulled away. Then it escalated. He started rolling over in the night, his back pressing against mine. The first time it happened, the solid, warm contact sent a jolt through me, so powerful I thought I might have stopped breathing. It was the most intimate physical contact I had ever had with him, and he was completely unaware of it. One night, I woke up to find his arm draped over my waist, his hand resting on my stomach. His body was curled around mine, my back tucked into the curve of his chest, his face buried in my hair. He was breathing deeply, evenly, lost to the world. I lay there, trapped and liberated all at once, my mind a chaotic storm of panic and bliss. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. It was everything I had ever wanted and everything I was terrified of. I didn't move a muscle. I just lay there, soaking in the borrowed intimacy, the accidental closeness, until the first light of dawn began to creep into the room. Just before my alarm went off, he shifted and rolled away, pulling the warmth with him, leaving me feeling cold and strangely bereft. He never mentioned it in the morning. I never knew if he was truly asleep, or if it was a form of plausible deniability, a way for him to seek the comfort he so desperately needed without having to name it. I began to analyze every detail of our strange cohabitation, searching for clues, for meaning. He had a peculiar habit. He never fully closed the bedroom door. He would always leave it cracked open just an inch, a sliver of hallway light cutting into the darkness of the room. At first, I thought it was just carelessness, but it happened every single night. It became a symbol for me, a metaphor for his emotional state. He was in the room, in my bed, but he wasn't fully committed to being there. The open door was his escape route, a physical manifestation of his ambiguity. He was present, but he kept a way out, a path back to the world where things were simpler, where we were just friends. It was a constant, silent reminder of the fragility of our arrangement, a sign that this sanctuary was temporary, and that at any moment, he could walk through that door and never come back. My life had become a vigil in a dimly lit room, waiting for a door to either swing fully open or click definitively shut. The not knowing was a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my days. The crossing happened on a night that was no different from any other. It was a Thursday in late autumn, the air outside crisp with the promise of winter. The ritual had been going on for nearly 2 months, and we had settled into its rhythm with a practiced ease that felt both comfortable and dangerously deceptive. He had a brutal practice that day, and he was quieter than usual, the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. We ate dinner, a simple pasta I'd made, and the silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the worn, familiar silence of two people who had run out of small talk and were content to simply exist in the same space. After dinner, he showered, the sound of the water a familiar backdrop to my own evening routine of cleaning the kitchen. He emerged from the bathroom, hair damp and curling at the nape of his neck, wearing an old t-shirt and a pair of my sweatpants that were just a little too short on him. He went into the bedroom without a word, and I followed a few minutes later, my heart beginning its nightly, anxious tattoo against my ribs. The room was dark, save for the usual sliver of light from the hallway slicing across the floor. The door was, as always, left ajar. I slipped into my side of the bed, the cool sheets a brief shock against my skin. Liam was lying on his side, facing the wall, his breathing slow and even. I assumed he was already asleep, or close to it. I settled in, pulling the covers up to my chin, and prepared for another long night of watchful, tense stillness. I closed my eyes, trying to will my body to relax, to accept the strange intimacy of our arrangement without letting my mind spiral into its usual labyrinth of what-ifs. A few minutes passed in complete silence. The only sounds were the distant groan of the building's pipes and the faint hum of traffic from the street below. I was just on the edge of drifting off, my mind finally letting go of its anxious grip, when his voice cut through the darkness, soft and low. "Ethan." I froze. My eyes snapped open. He had never spoken after the lights were out. The night was our silent space. "Yeah," I answered, my own voice a rough whisper. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the subtle shift of fabric as he turned over in the bed to face me. Now we were lying face to face in the near dark, the space between us charged with a sudden, palpable energy. I couldn't see his expression clearly, only the dark shape of his head on the pillow, the faint glint of light in his eyes. "Are you awake?" he asked. It was a stupid question. I had just answered him, but I knew it wasn't what he was really asking. He was asking if I was present, if I was with him in this moment. "I'm awake," I said, my voice barely audible. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with everything we had never said, with the weight of all the nights we had spent like this, lying inches apart, pretending this was normal. I could feel his gaze on me in the dark, and my entire body felt electrified, every nerve ending on high alert. He shifted again, moving closer. The heat from his body washed over me, and I could smell the clean, fresh scent of his skin. He was so close now I could feel his breath, warm and soft, against my cheek. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. This was it. The precipice. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Was it frustration? Desperation? "I can't keep pretending." My mind raced, trying to understand. Pretending what? That he wasn't heartbroken? That his back didn't hurt? That he was okay? Before I could form a coherent thought, before I could ask him what he meant, he closed the small remaining distance between us. His hand came up, his fingers gently cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, tentative, but it sent a tremor through my entire body. It was not the accidental, sleepy touch I had become accustomed to. This was deliberate. This was intentional. This was a question. He hesitated for a heartbeat, his face just inches from mine. I could have pulled away. I could have made a joke, deflected, retreated back to the safety of our established friendship. The fortress I had built around my heart was screaming at me to raise the drawbridge, to protect myself from the inevitable pain. But in that moment, looking into the shadowed silhouette of his face, feeling the warmth of his hand on my skin, I found I had no defenses left. All the years of silent yearning, all the nights of quiet observation, all the carefully suppressed love rose up in a single, silent wave. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just waited. Would it be okay? He whispered, his voice so fragile it was almost lost in the darkness. Ethan, would it be okay if I kissed you? The question shattered me. The fact that he asked, that he was giving me the choice, that he was making himself this vulnerable, was a more profound confession than any declaration of love could ever be. All I could manage was a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss. It was soft, hesitant, and breathtakingly gentle. It was a kiss of discovery, of exploration. It was 1,000 unspoken conversations finally finding a voice. It tasted of uncertainty and a deep, soul-shaking relief. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he moved against mine with a tenderness that made my eyes burn with unshed tears. I lifted my hand, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at the back of his neck, pulling him infinitesimally closer. In that quiet, darkened room, with the door still cracked open to a world that no longer mattered, a line was crossed, a seal was broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning arrived with a cruel, impartial brightness. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and exposing the fragile, uncertain landscape of the night before. I woke up alone. The other side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow, a faint ghost of his presence. For a moment, a sliver of panic shot through me. I thought he was gone, that he had fled in the pre-dawn light, leaving me to grapple with the aftermath of that kiss alone. But then I heard it, the soft clink of ceramic on stone, the hiss of the espresso machine. He was in the kitchen. He hadn't run. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I lay there for a long time, replaying the kiss in my mind. It felt both vividly real and like a dream I was desperately trying to cling to. The gentleness of it, the raw vulnerability in his whispered question. It had felt like a beginning, a monumental shift in the tectonic plates of our relationship. But now, in the harsh light of day, doubt began to creep in, a cold, insidious fog. What if it was just a moment of weakness for him? A desperate grasp for comfort in the lonely dark? What if, to him, it meant nothing more than a temporary solace, and I, in my hopeful delusion, had interpreted it as a confession? The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. When I finally gathered the courage to leave the bedroom, I found him standing at the kitchen counter, his back to me, staring out the window as he waited for the coffee to brew. He was dressed, not in the sweatpants he usually wore around the apartment, but in his own jeans and a hoodie, his gym bag already packed and sitting by the door. He was ready to leave. The sight of it sent another wave of anxiety through me. He heard me enter and turned, a coffee mug in his hand. The easy, comfortable silence that usually filled my apartment was gone. In its place was a thick, crackling tension. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze darted around the room, landing on the floor, the ceiling, the counter, anywhere but on me. "Morning," he mumbled, pushing a mug of coffee across the counter towards me. "I made you one." His voice was strained, unnaturally casual. The Liam of this morning was not the Liam of last night. The vulnerable, searching man from the darkness had been replaced by a stranger wearing a familiar face, a man armored in awkwardness and avoidance. "Thanks," I said, my own voice sounding foreign. I took the mug, my fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. He flinched, pulling his hand back as if he'd been burned. The small, reflexive action was a punch to the gut. I leaned against the counter, clutching the warm mug, the silence stretching between us, taut and unbearable. I knew I should say something, ask something, but the words were stuck in my throat, choked by the fear of what his answer might be. He broke the silence first, his voice still carefully neutral. "I should get going. Got an early practice." It was a lie. I knew his schedule. His practice wasn't for another 2 hours. He was running. He grabbed his gym bag, slinging it over his shoulder, still refusing to look at me directly. He was halfway to the door when the words finally broke free from me, propelled by a surge of desperation and hurt. "Liam." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't turn around. I could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension in his neck. "What about last night?" I asked, the question hanging in the air between us, fragile and heavy. He was silent for a long moment. I watched his back, willing him to turn around, to look at me, to say something, anything, that would make sense of the chasm that had opened up between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tight, aimed at the door in front of him. I was a mess last night, Ethan. I'm sorry." He paused, and then delivered the killing blow. "I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry if I crossed a line." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing in the suddenly cavernous apartment. I stood there, rooted to the spot, his apology ringing in my ears. "Crossed a line," he spoke of it like it was a mistake, a drunken indiscretion, a moment of poor judgment. He had taken the most honest, vulnerable moment of my life and dismissed it as a regrettable error. The warmth of the kiss turned to ash in my memory. The hope that had bloomed in the darkness withered under the brutal glare of his morning after regret. I had allowed myself, for one brief, intoxicating moment, to believe that he felt what I felt. And now, I just felt like a fool. The quiet observer who had finally stepped into the frame, only to be told he had ruined the picture. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the floor, the coffee growing cold in my hands, my carefully constructed world shattered around me. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. The silence from him was absolute. No texts, no calls, no key turning in the lock in the evening. My apartment, once his sanctuary, was now just a quiet, empty space, each room haunted by his absence. The dent in the couch cushion where he always sat seemed to mock me. The extra toothbrush in the bathroom holder was a monument to my foolishness. The empty side of my bed was a vast, cold expanse of loneliness. I had grown so accustomed to his presence, to the steady rhythm of his breathing in the dark, that the silence he left behind was deafening. It was a physical ache, a phantom limb I kept reaching for. I tried to reason with myself, to rationalize his behavior. He was confused. He was grieving a long-term relationship. He was under immense pressure with his swimming. Maybe he was scared of what it all meant. But my rational mind was no match for the raw, wounded part of my heart that felt used and discarded. He had sought comfort in my arms, and then apologized for it, as if it were a shameful act. The tenderness I thought I had seen in him, I now recategorized as desperation. The vulnerability as weakness. I had been a port in a storm, and the storm had passed, and he had sailed on without a backward glance. The friendship I had guarded so fiercely for years felt like it was in ruins, and the love I had hidden for so long now felt like a liability, a source of shame. After a week of this agonizing silence, something inside me shifted. The hurt began to curdle into anger. Not a loud, raging anger, but a quiet, simmering frustration. Frustration with him for his cowardice, for his inability to face what had happened between us. And frustration with myself, for allowing myself to be so passive, for always being the quiet observer, never the one to demand answers. I had spent years analyzing him from a distance, trying to interpret his every move, his every subtle gesture. I was done interpreting. I needed clarity. I couldn't go back to the way things were, pretending that kiss never happened, pretending my heart wasn't shattered on my kitchen floor. The old friendship was gone, destroyed by that single moment of honesty in the dark. If there was any hope of building something new, something real, it had to be built on a foundation of truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. I found him where I knew he would be, at the pool. It was late, the natatorium mostly empty, the lights dimmed. He was in the water, swimming laps with a relentless, punishing pace, trying to outrun the thoughts in his head. I watched him for a while from the bleachers, the same spot where I had first seen him all those years ago. He was just as beautiful, just as powerful, but now I saw the frantic energy for what it was, an escape. He was hiding in the water, in the burn of his muscles, in the rhythmic repetition of his strokes. When he finally finished, pulling himself from the water with a weary gasp, he saw me. His body went rigid. The flicker of surprise in his eyes was quickly replaced by a guarded, wary expression. He grabbed his towel, wrapping it around his waist, and walked towards me slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Ethan," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And you're not going to run away this time." He flinched at my words, a clear sign they had hit their mark. He sighed, a deep, tired sound, and ran a hand through his wet hair. "There's nothing to talk about, isn't there?" I pushed, standing up and walking down the bleachers to meet him on the pool deck. The air was thick with the familiar smell of chlorine. "You kiss me like you mean it, like it's the only thing in the world that makes sense, and then you apologize for it and disappear for a week. You don't get to do that, Liam. You don't get to use me as your emotional life raft, and then just cut the rope." My words hung in the echoing space between us. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in a week. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't annoyance or indifference. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear. He looked like a cornered animal. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Then make me understand." I shot back, my voice rising with all the pent-up frustration and hurt. Was any of it real? Or was I just convenient? Was I just a warm body in a cold bed? Because I need to know. I deserve to know. He finally broke. His carefully constructed dam of avoidance crumbled, and everything came flooding out. "Of course it was real," he choked out, his voice raw with emotion. "God, Ethan, that's what scares me. It was the only thing that's felt real in months." He sank down onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. I stood there, stunned into silence, my anger dissolving in the face of his overwhelming distress. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, pleading anguish. "I don't know what's happening to me," he said, his voice a broken whisper. "My whole life, I've had a plan. A straight line. Swim, graduate, get a job, marry Sarah. It was all laid out. And then it all fell apart. And I was drowning. And you were there. You were just there. So solid. So quiet. And being with you, in your apartment, it was the only time I felt like I could breathe." He took a shaky breath, his gaze fixed on mine. "And then, it started to change. Lying next to you at night. I started to need it. I started to need to be near you. And it terrified me. Because it wasn't part of the plan. You weren't part of the plan. This feeling, it wasn't in the blueprint for my life. So when I kissed you, it was like I was finally admitting it to myself. And it felt right. It felt more right than anything with Sarah ever did. And that scared the hell out of me. So I ran. Because it's easier to stick to a broken plan than to admit that you want something you never knew you were allowed to have." His confession, so raw and honest, washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my anger. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He was running from a feeling so powerful it threatened to rewrite the entire narrative of his life. All my analysis, all my quiet observation, had missed the most crucial element. He was just as scared as I was. Maybe even more so. I had had years to come to terms with my feelings for him. He was being hit with them all at once, a tidal wave he didn't know how to survive. I sat down on the bench next to him. The cold, wet fabric of his towel soaked through my jeans, but I didn't care. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat there, beside him, letting his words settle in the quiet, chlorine-scented air. I was no longer an observer on the bleachers. I was here, on the pool deck, in the mess with him. Finally, I reached out and put my hand on his knee. He flinched at first, then relaxed into the touch, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. "You're not drowning, Liam," I said softly. "And you're not alone in this." He looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. A small, watery smile touched his lips. "What do we do now?" he whispered. I looked at our reflection in the dark, still water of the pool. Two figures, sitting close together on a bench, a world of uncertainty stretching out before them. I didn't have a map. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time, it didn't feel terrifying. It felt like a beginning. "I don't know," I answered, my voice full of a certainty that surprised me. "But whatever it is, we figure it out together." That night, on the cold tiles of the natatorium, we began to build a new foundation. It wasn't built on unspoken rituals or plausible deniability, but on the messy, terrifying, beautiful bedrock of honesty. We talked for hours, the words pouring out of both of us, a flood of repressed feelings, fears, and hopes. He told me about the suffocating pressure of his parents' expectations, about the fear of his swimming career ending, about the profound loneliness he felt even when surrounded by his teammates. He confessed that his feelings for me had been growing for a long time, a quiet undercurrent beneath the surface of his conscious thought, and that the breakup with Sarah hadn't created them, but had simply allowed them to finally break through to the surface. I, in turn, told him everything. I confessed the years of silent affection, the secret archive of moments I had stored in my heart. I told him about the fear that had kept me from ever saying a word, the terror of losing the most important friendship I had ever had. Laying my own vulnerability bare was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but as I spoke, I felt a profound sense of release, as if a weight I had been carrying for years was finally being lifted from my shoulders. There were no more shadows, no more hidden depths. We were just two people, stripped of all our armor, meeting on the common ground of our shared feelings. When we finally left the pool, the first hints of dawn were painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. The world felt new, washed clean. We walked back to my apartment in a comfortable silence, the space between us no longer filled with tension, but with a quiet, settled understanding. When we got to my door, he paused, looking at me with an uncertain expression. The old question hung in the air. What now? I didn't give him a chance to retreat back into his fear. I took his hand, my fingers lacing through his. His hand was cold from the morning air, but he squeezed mine tightly. I pulled him inside and closed the door behind us. The apartment felt different. It was no longer just my space, or his temporary refuge. It was our space. He didn't collapse on the couch. Instead, he followed me into the kitchen as I started making coffee, his presence a warm, solid comfort at my back. We moved around each other with an easy, unspoken choreography, a dance of domestic intimacy that felt both brand new and incredibly ancient. When the coffee was ready, we took our mugs and went into the bedroom. He didn't hesitate. He sat on the edge of the bed, my bed, our bed, and looked at me, a small, hopeful smile on his face. I walked over to the door and gently, deliberately, pushed it closed until I heard the soft click of the latch. The sliver of light from the hallway was gone. We were sealed in, together, in the quiet, private world we were just beginning to create. The symbolism of the act was not lost on either of us. It was a promise. No more escape routes. No more ambiguity. We were choosing to be here, in this room, together. The days and weeks that followed were a process of learning a new language. The language of US. It was a language spoken not in grand declarations, but in small, quiet gestures. It was in the way he started leaving his things at my apartment, not out of convenience, but with a sense of permanence. A drawer of his clothes, his brand of shampoo in the shower, his textbooks taking up permanent residence on my desk. It was in the way we learned to sleep together, not as two separate bodies sharing a mattress, but as a unit. There was no more rigid frontier down the middle of the bed. We would fall asleep tangled together, his arm around my waist, my head on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a soothing lullaby. The accidental touches of the past were replaced by intentional, loving embraces. It wasn't a fairy tale. He still had his moments of fear, of doubt. The world outside our apartment hadn't changed. He still had to face his teammates, his family, the shattered blueprint of his old life. There were hard conversations, moments of anxiety where he would withdraw into himself, the old habits of avoidance dying hard. But now, instead of running, he would talk to me. He would let me in. And I learned that my role was not to fix his problems, but to be the steady, unwavering presence beside him as he navigated them. I learned to be patient, to give him space when he needed it, and to pull him close when he felt like he was drifting away. We were learning to be each other's anchor. His swimming career ended not with a triumphant splash at the Olympic trials, but with a quiet, personal decision. He realized he had been chasing a dream that was no longer his, a dream fueled by the expectations of others. Letting it go was both a grief and a liberation. And I was there to witness it, to hold him when he mourned the end of an era, and to celebrate with him as he began to discover who he was without the identity of the swimmer. He decided to go to grad school for physical therapy, a path that felt true to him, a way to use his intimate knowledge of the human body to heal rather than to compete. My own world expanded as well. With the fear of rejection gone, the love I had kept hidden for so long was finally free to breathe, to grow. It infused my art. My photographs became more intimate, more honest. I turned the lens away from distant subjects and focused on the quiet, beautiful moments of the life we were building. A picture of his hand resting on a book, the way the morning light caught the curve of his shoulder as he slept, the steam rising from our coffee mugs on a cold morning. My art was no longer about observing life from a distance. It was about celebrating the profound beauty of being a part of it. We never had a big, dramatic coming out moment. We simply started living our life and let the world adjust. Our friends, his teammates, they saw it. They saw the change in him, the settled peace that had replaced his restless energy. They saw the way we looked at each other, the easy way we touched. And they accepted it, because it was impossible to see us together and not see that it was right. We had built our relationship in a private, quiet bubble, and when we finally let the world in, we found that the foundation was strong enough to stand. One evening, months into our new life, we were lying in bed, reading. The room was filled with a comfortable silence, the only sound the soft rustle of turning pages. I looked over at him, his face illuminated by the warm glow of his reading lamp, a pair of glasses I never knew he needed perched on his nose. He looked so content, so at peace. A wave of love for him washed over me, so powerful it almost took my breath away. He must have felt me looking, because he lowered his book and smiled at me. "What?" he asked, his voice soft. "Nothing," I said, smiling back. "I was just thinking about that first night. The first time you slept in this bed." His expression softened, a flicker of the old pain and confusion in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, unwavering affection. He reached out, his hand covering mine on the blanket. "I was so lost," he said quietly, "and I was so scared. I felt like I was falling, and I just grabbed onto the first solid thing I could find." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "I just got lucky that the first solid thing I found turned out to be my foundation." His words settled deep in my heart, a perfect, beautiful truth. I hadn't just been a temporary harbor. I was his home, and he, in turn, was mine. The quiet boy who spent his life behind a lens, watching the world go by, had finally found his focus. The golden boy who moved through the world like a force of nature had finally found his stillness. We were two halves of a whole we never knew was incomplete. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A rainy night, a friend in need, a shared bed. They seem small, insignificant at the time, but they are the seeds from which a new world can grow. Our world wasn't built with a grand design or a detailed blueprint. It was built slowly, quietly, in the dark. It was built with hesitant touches and whispered questions, with shared silences and terrifying confessions. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together, a space where we didn't have to be anything other than what we were. And in that quiet space, we found not just love, but a profound and lasting peace, a home built for two, with a door that was finally, securely closed.